Welcome to WebRTC Live. In WebRTC Live, we cover the latest technical topics and business use cases for WebRTC and live video. As always, this episode is brought to you by WebRTC-Ventures, leading integrators of WebRTC video into your custom application.
Welcome back to WebRTC Live. I'm your host, Aaron Stein, founder and CEO of WebRTC-Ventures. WebRTC-Ventures is a custom design and development agency focused on building live video applications. We're here to help you take your application live. You can learn more about us at WebRTC.ventures. Thanks for joining us live today on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch, and welcome also to any of you watching a replay of today's event. For those of you with us live, you can ask questions throughout the stream by leaving a comment in whichever platform you're viewing this. For today's episode, I'm joined by Saúl Ibarra Corretgé. And Saul, I forgot to ask you to confirm pronunciation before we started, so hopefully I was relatively close there, but great to have you anyways, Saúl.
Yeah, that was close enough. Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me. Really, never been here before, and I'm really happy to be here.
Very happy to have you here. Saúl, for those of you watching, is a principal software engineer at 8x8, open source and RTC pundit, and self-appointed Chief Jitsi Evangelist. Saúl is joining us from the ComCon conference in Blackburn in the UK for a sneak peek into the present and future of the Jitsi project. That's right. You can tell this is not actually Saúl's home with the fancy Renaissance paintings behind you there. Or maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen your home before.
No,
maybe it's like
not for me. Not for me. Certainly not.
Excellent. Well, really glad to have you here. So we are at WebRTC-Ventures. We're helping to sponsor the ComCon conference. And in fact, one of my colleagues there is with you, our CTO, Alberto Gonzalez. Alberto, pop in and say hello.
Hi. We are here in the UK. Happy
Excellent.
to present.
Yeah, really happy to have you there. And Alberto, I hope you don't mind me calling you out on this, but you just hopped over from Spain where you had a wedding celebration. So congratulations on that, and thanks for
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on over to the UK for this. So as I said, we're also helping to sponsor the ComCon event this year, and I can't say anything about it, and I don't know all the details, but I know there's going to be a big party tonight that we're sponsoring. So for those of you there at ComCon, I hope you all enjoy it, and the rest of us look forward to hearing about the big surprise after it happens. So let's start with that. How is ComCon going?
It's actually going really, really good. Like, this is a very unique conference. I've had the privilege of participating before, but never in person. I think the first one was in 2018. And at the time, my first daughter was born, and I couldn't make it. But I sent my friend and colleague Boris, and he gave me some really good feedback. He was really, really happy that he was able to represent and come over to the conference. And in fact, Dan had told me about him planning to do this thing while we were at AstriCon, I want to believe. And when he sort of pitched it to me, at the end of it, I remember telling him, "Oh, so kind of similar to NodeConf EU." And he was like, "Exactly right. I could have saved myself the entire sort of pitch." And he got sort of inspired by that with a more of an RTC twist. And I think this feels more like a developer's retreat than your regular conference. And I think it really helps bring this sort of togetherness. It has been a while since I've been to a conference where I've taken like so many notes and things that they want to go back and check. And I think one of the important things that ComCon brings to the table that's responsible for that is, because everybody is in the same location, we're on the same hotel, you run into people, you end up having a lot more conversations than if you're in a random hotel somewhere and then, I don't know, dinner time comes and everybody goes to random places, but here everybody's in the same place all the time, and which actually is very good for this purpose. So really, really enjoying it so far, and looking forward to one more day tomorrow and what's left of today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely sorry that I couldn't be there. It's a conference I've heard very good things about. Our friend and colleague Dan Jenkins from Nimble8 puts this on, and I've always heard great things about this being a really excellent, really fun conference, and he does a great job too with making sure that there's some fun events. I think I remember seeing some photos of archery at a past event.
Yeah, this one we got some outdoor games, some video games yesterday, secret road trip today. So lots of cool stuff.
Exactly. So yeah, so I'm glad Alberto can be there. Hopefully I can join in next year. And for those of you watching, you're missing out on the fun. So you can check out comcon.xyz and follow the event for next year. So for those who are not familiar with Jitsi, perhaps, which is hopefully very few people, it's a very well-known project and very widely used in the WebRTC space. But nonetheless, let's give our viewers a quick introduction to Jitsi and then also Jitsi as a service.
Right. So Jitsi is a set of open source projects that are designed to build like WebRTC-compatible video conferencing platforms. So we have like the whole collection of them. They compose this thing we call Jitsi Meet, which is a video conferencing system. You could think of it as an open source alternative to Google Meet, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, that kind of stuff. But it's fully open source. You can self-host it, and it has been in development since the entirety of the Jitsi project for 20 years. But it's sort of it has evolved with the trends of technology and its current incantation, if you will, right? So Jitsi Meet when WebRTC came out, so it sort of migrated into the browser. It's been around for quite a while. So it's been around for quite a little bit. And some years ago, we were part of Atlassian, now we're part of 8x8. And as part of sort of what we do, which is provide a meetings capability to an internal product and also provide the ability for anybody to use free meetings on meet.g.si. We also provide the open source project for people to run. And then for the last couple of years, we decided to venture into the CPaaS business and do a software as a service solution we call JaaS, Jitsi as a service, where we're going to host it for you. And we added a lot of customizability to Jitsi Meet and tons of APIs, so that because our primary API is a very high level API that you embed the entire frame. So the whole UI is pre-built, and our ideal customer is someone who has certain product or certain activity they are doing and they want to add some meetings capability to it, like to enhance it. And we add all the ability to customize it so it blends well with the existing surroundings. But the idea is we give you the entire meetings experience so that you don't need to worry about building that part, but you sort of focus on building your product, and we focus on building meetings, and then that's where we think we can add value. But we still have, like, the project is of course open source and self-hostable, and we put a lot of effort in making sure this works like this, and to a point where we're trying to see where the intersection of these two things can go, and where we can add value to those users that are self-hosting, maybe with some hosted services, not everything, part of it, and sort of things like that. So that's a bit of the duality that we live in right now. But I think so far we've kind of followed our heart with where it made sense, because of course the Jitsi community has grown over the years, and it's something we value very deeply, and you don't want to take a direction that would alienate everyone, of course. And I think we have, well, of course I would think that, but I think we struck a reasonable balance in how the both offerings work. In fact, we had Tsahi, I think, write a guest article in our blog, which I think it illustrated very well our thinking, which is that it's like a two-way street, because you can start, let's say, you're prototyping a product and you wanna go fast and see how it works out. You could go CPaaS to build it with some APIs real quick. And let's say that at one point in time, You for some reason disagree with the line that we're taking, and you decide that you want to self-host it. You could do that. The API is exactly the same, so not much changes, just where you point the endpoints, right? Or let's say that you started out with your self-hosted installation because we try to make it as easy as possible to install. And at one point, you decided that running that infrastructure is actually a lot of work that you don't want to do. And well, we're happy to take your business. And you can then switch over to JaaS and same API, so you can then just work on customizing, handling, our webhooks and this and that and that. And so it can go both ways. And that's sort of where JaaS is for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It fits with our experience at WebRTC-Ventures too, because we don't provide a CPaaS like you all do, but obviously we work with you all and others, and oftentimes our clients come to us as like a startup. They have limited funding. They're maybe still experimenting with their idea, and so starting with a CPaaS and starting with some sort of a starter project that they can put in like a frame, into an application just to prove out the concept a little bit, maybe to have at least something to show investors to get their additional funding with, and something that they can launch with and scale with also in many cases. But then when they reach that point of saying, okay, there's a design decision that's been made in this framework and at the starter kit level or at the CPaaS level that I don't like, or I want to customize something further, then being able to transition over to like the Jitsi open source project and make their own design decisions there, I think that is an incredibly powerful path, and that's the direction we often see clients go in our work, but also going that other direction, as you describe it, reaching a point of saying, hey, it can be a lot to manage your own infrastructure, and it turns out maybe for our use case we don't need to do that, or we don't want to do that, so then switching back to something like JaaS and allowing you all to take care of that is can be a big relief too for clients. So yeah, I think it's a very although it is, I think, an interesting duality, as you said, trying to manage both of those within your organization. I do think it's a powerful path to offer people. So
in a way, it is a duality, but we are, generally speaking, so it's open source first. Mm-hmm. So we develop in the open in GitHub. So for example, if you monitor master, you're gonna see the stuff before it arrives at JaaS, because it gets developed, it makes it in, we deploy it to our free service, we monitor, then we make a JaaS release for paying customers, right? So in a way, what we give away, other than the software, is the free service, and what we get in exchange is, in a way, like a simplified version of QA, right? So we can put it out there, using for people to use for free, and then we can learn if something we didn't realize that something was kind of broken in certain scenarios, so we can fix it before it reaches paying customers. But even when we deploy to paying customers, of course, problems can still materialize. But we have developed this ability we call it release pinning, so our customers can stay on one release and then like switch to the new one and stay on the older one, and like maybe they want to have two accounts, like staging account just for testing the new stuff, and then when they're comfortable, they can migrate. So we've learned a lot along the way, and all of the APIs that we need to add to Jitsi, they're added, to the main repo, and then that's how they trickle down to JaaS customers. And when we see, because some customers do have like their design opinions and whatnot, I think building your custom UI, it's still at least simpler than to run the entire infrastructure yourself. And so even though our main use case is the full frame, we do offer the lower level API, which has no user interface whatsoever. And then you have to do all the work, which is a lot of it,
sure,
as you probably know. But I think it is less work than having to operate a global infrastructure, multiple copies of the software running in parallel for release rolling and all this stuff. Like, it sounds easy in theory, like, yeah, I'll spin some containers here and there, but then in practice things can get hairy quickly. and having many servers running has a cost and all of that good stuff. So we like to think we add that value to JaaS users.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you watching us live, I want to remind you that you can ask a question by leaving a comment in the platform that you're viewing this in, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitch. I won't call them out publicly, but I just saw one of our previous clients, old friend and colleague, comment on here that he's going to be sharing this with some of his colleagues, that he could definitely see it fitting in some of the work that they do. Nice. So feel free to ask those questions anytime, and we'll bring them on screen. I'm going to bring up your slides now, Saul, and let's talk a little bit about what's coming up, what's new in Jitsi.
Yeah, let's look at it. So I like to mention a couple of things because there's always a bunch of stuff going on at the same time. So some of this is work in progress, some of this is finalized. So let's just say everything is work in progress to be finalized soon. Something we're continuously working on is quality and screen sharing improvements. The browsers tweak their things like 0 Hertz screen sharing. Sometimes the codec differences can affect the screen sharing quality, so we're always working towards having the best screen sharing possible and the best quality possible. Also tweaking bandwidth estimations and what have you. So that is an effort. That's not a concerted one, is an ongoing one. We always are tweaking things there. Something that's coming up is AV1 codec support. So browsers have added support for it recently, where recently Chrome added support for simulcast over AV1. AV1 can do SVC, but there are scenarios where simulcast would also be desirable. So they're adding support for that. And we're adding support for it as well. It will likely not be the default, but it will be available. And the idea is for us to experiment with it and seeing what scenarios you want to use it. Like, for example, we have sort of two types, if you will, of calls or meetings. So it's the one-to-one and the multi-party meeting, right? And the thing is, you might want to use different ones depending on the scenario, because in one case you only have one video, in another one you have multiple videos. Then there is also the mobile side of things. So mobile users may want to use different ones, and we have a bit of a mix there. So let's see what AV1 adds into that one. The next thing we're sort of working on, something that's been brewing for quite a while. I gave a presentation at FOSDEM earlier this year, and it's support for 10,000 participants. This is a big one, an exciting one. So prior to this effort, our limit was 500 participants. This is something we launched, and we thought we were pretty much at the limit of some parts of the architecture. And some of my colleagues found a way to push that even further with some re-architecting. So the idea that we are bringing to the table is that these 10,000 participants are actual participants of the meeting. This is not the streaming kind of scenario. You are in the meeting, except that there will be like two little worlds. One is like the main participants, let's say, and the other ones are, which could be, up to 500, and the other ones are visitors. And we created this architecture because we can optimize things for having lots of visitors, because they're only receiving stuff, they're not sending anything. And then when they want to participate, they can change their connection mode to become an active participant. And then they can, share their camera and microphone and ask some questions. I remember thinking that all of these large meetings were kind of ridiculous in the past. It's like, nobody needs this. But turns out that, surprisingly, there are few but kind of high-profile meetings that have this shape, like, investor meetings and things like that, where there's a lot of people in a meeting. They are listening 99% of the time, but then at one point, they need to ask a question. So you need to have a system that caters for both. And we wanted the experience to be integrated into the meeting. So to be the same thing as just being there, instead of doing like a hybrid mode where you're seeing streaming. Then you would need to make sure that you're seeing a low latency stream, because it needs to match like the actual meeting. So that looked like a no-go for us. So we went for this other style, and we're hoping to roll it out soon on Jitsi and JaaS as well, for others to use and unlock these 10,000 participants. There are a bunch of changes in the software. So it's like a two-parter, of course, is the hardware and software interplay, because you do need more hardware to run 10,000 participants. But we have to make changes in the software to support this. And this is a very exciting project, because I think like really it's an order of magnitude more than where we were before. But suddenly, with a few tricks, we got there, and all of the details are my FOSDEM talk. Funny enough, it started. So just to dive into the funny details a little bit, we use XMPP for signaling. And we learned about this visitors mode from a paper that was shared in some conference or something about XMPP usage in the military. And then it's like, that's how we can do it. So and then stretch it from there and adapted it to our use case. But like the idea of visitors sort of came from there. That was pretty fun.
Nice. And you just started to say a little bit about this, but we had a question come in from Abhishek asking you to talk a little bit about the current WebRTC signaling architecture that Jitsi has. So you said XMPP. Tell us a little bit more.
Sure. So for those who don't know, XMPP is a signaling, like it's a pretty much a chat protocol, if you will, that has been around since I think the late 90s. So it has been around forever, if you will. And it allows multiple participants to communicate in like chat rooms and have history. So it can do everything that WhatsApp can, let's say, something like that. And what we use it for is to power all this signaling. So when you are in a meeting, you're really in a group chat. And our in-meeting chat is powered by XMPP. And then we have this server component called a focus. And when people join together into a chat, the focus allocates some multimedia channels into our Jitsi video bridge. That's our SFU, or selected forwarding unit. And then it creates media sessions between the server and each participant, and that's why they connect and they are in the same room. The mechanism to signal these multimedia sessions is actually Jingle, which was invented by Google for Google Talk way back when. And it's the way that you establish like audio and video sessions in XMPP. So I still use it because it makes a lot of sense for this use case. In fact, what you can see there in these diagrams, our main signaling server is that P right there, which is Prosody, is our XMPP server of choice, is written in Lua. And a lot of the features that we support are made in form of plugins. Like our breakout rooms has certain server component that's written as a plugin for Prosody, lobby, so on and so forth. And sorry, all of the V1 and all of those Vs in the diagram are visitor nodes that are other Prosody servers. And then they are all interconnected. So for us, it's more of an implementation detail, if you will. But a lot of the concepts, if you would build a signaling system from scratch for a meetings product, you will end up creating a lot of abstractions that XMPP already has. So architecturally, the building blocks that it provides are really sound. And if you go back into Jitsi's history, you would see that Jitsi started out as a desktop piece of software, which was primarily XMPP and Jingle for calling. And then when Jitsi added multi-party video conferencing support, it was on the client. So one of the participants would host the conference for everybody else. And then that didn't last very long, of course. And so then the idea was to rip that out, push it to a backend, and then communicate with it, because XMPP has this built-in server-to-server and component type of connections. So you could put that thing there and just talk to it. And then suddenly everything is more scalable because you run it on the server. So it's in a way an accident of history. In another way, it's a good answer. but many people are sort of scared of XML these days because XMPP is XML, and it's not very popular, unfortunately. But it works well for us.
Excellent. Also, let's talk about React Native support.
Right. So our mobile apps are built with React Native. So our code base is React, and our mobile and web code base, I think we share around 80% or so of the code. So only the leaf components, the views are different, but all the business logic is shared between web and mobile. And what we have is we wrapped our React Native thing into a little native SDK, because our first sort of both internal and external customers were in full native applications. So we have an Android SDK and an iOS SDK. But React Native has gotten quite a bit of popular, and people are asking for a React Native, for an actual React Native SDK. So we're preparing one, and like the first bits already landed, and we're hoping that we have the first version soon. And the idea would be that little wrapping layer is not there, so you can embed the entire mobile meeting experience in your app as like another screen that you transition to from wherever your app is doing. At work, for example, 8x8 develops this application called 8x8 Work, and you have your messages, your calendars, your calls, your stuff, and one of the tabs is meetings. So when you go there, it's like our SDK powering that part. And this is the idea, that you can integrate it that easily, but in a React Native app. And that should be coming soon.
Excellent. All right. What else is new and upcoming in JaaS specifically?
So in JaaS, we're always working in new APIs because customers want to customize more parts of the user interface, of the behavior. So for instance, we have added the ability to add custom toolbar buttons, and then you can, via the API, give us an icon, give us a name for the button, and then an event handler. And when it will show up in the UI, will show completely integrated with the existing UI. And when you press it, you'll get an event and you can do the behavior you want. So we're always continuously adding this kind of customizability and flexibility for our JaaS customers. Something we added like last year, but we didn't really launch it with a big buzz was, and again, this is where we start blurring the line between self-hosted and JaaS, is what we call JaaS components. So as I said, Jitsi Meet is a collection of components, and one such component is Jigasi, or sort of PSTN gateway. So it sounds it's sort of legacy, but you have to have it. So sometimes you need to call out to people that don't have a computer, and sometimes people that don't have a computer need to call in. And that is one of the hardest things to deploy yourself, not because we made it hard, but if you truly want like something global, you need multiple phone numbers, some kind of mapping service to map like conference IDs to actual conferences, to handle the pin entry, multiple SIP trunks and routes and all of that good stuff. And some people just don't want to do that, right? And so what we did is we made it so with a simple configuration change, in the Docker example, for instance, is as simple as setting a variable to 1. And in the Debian case, you will just get a question asked. If you say, hey, would you like to enable JaaS components for using the PSTN? You say, yes. We'll take your email, create a JaaS account for you automatically, and everything will be pre-configured to have dial-in access via JaaS. You'll be on the free plan, and then you can scale it up from there. So you'll have phone numbers all around the world for people to dial into the conference. And this was, I think, pretty unique insofar as you do have all the tools to deploy it yourself, but because it's not something that is going to be heavily used, I think you might want to instead offload it to us so we can run it. We have the infrastructure, the worldwide phone number network thingamajig, and that part is sort of solved for you. And that's JaaS components. Right now we have dialing, but we're thinking of adding some more types of components. And then if you stretch it all the way, we have what we're thinking about right now, what we're calling like a hybrid cloud model of sorts. And this is a model where you will only host the front end, so just the user interface and the JavaScript pretty much, and then you're going to connect to JaaS for the backend. So all the signaling, you will connect to the outside, and of course all the media stuff. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, of course, customizability is one such thing. So we can add a lot of flexibility, but there is a chance that we cannot accommodate everything. And you have made some changes yourself and you want to stick to them. And because it's open source, it's easy for you to take the front end, change it to your liking, and you just want to run that. But you also want the worldwide scalable infrastructure so you can connect to ours. And where we think we can add some value is because usually there's also a bunch of privacy-minded people that self-host for that very reason. And this is also an answer to that, because if you host the front end, you host the end-to-end, like we enable end-to-end encryption by default in that scenario, and then you hold the code that manages the keys. So we don't have access to that. And so in my opinion, so I grew a bit disenamored with how end-to-end encryption can be implemented in the browser. I hope Dan accepts my lightning talk for tomorrow on the topic. But long story short is that the main sort of attack vector, or the main threat, would be your provider, right? Like that's the one you want to protect yourself from, quote unquote. It's like, I want to have my conversations through you, but I don't want to trust you all that much. But it turns out that I download the JavaScript from you, which means that you can change that and I won't notice, and you can compromise the keys and I'll still get the compromised code. So how do we do that? Well, if you run your front end, you know that your code is not tampered with because you are running it, not us. So all that key stuff runs on your premises, and all we get is encrypted data we don't know what to do with. So we just route it. And we think this can help some organizations that have these that face these challenges. And we think it's a pretty creative way of end-to-end encryption. Because we built it, the first version of it in 2020, the end-to-end encryption, then grew a bit disenamored with it. We now have end-to-end encryption with user verification, and this is like a twist on it to use it in this defensive manner against ourselves, because we don't want you to trust us. We want you to be sure that because of the way this is running, you don't need to trust us. The system works in your favor in that scenario.
Excellent. We're gonna excuse me. We have a few great questions coming in. I want to get to a couple of them here. Diego wants to know if in the future, what about a package that allows Jitsi to be used in Unity? Something I've seen a little more of, people trying to do WebRTC within the Unity context. Is that something you all are looking at?
Not directly. We know some people are using it, and in fact, in our handbook, we have a section dedicated to community, and then there's a subsection called third-party software, third-party packages, and there is a demo built with Unity. I do know of at least one product that's using it in prod. Some of the directions we take are based on, we see where our customers want to go, and if it makes sense for us. Right now, we haven't gotten sort of enough push to go for a first-party Unity integration, but we've pointed a number of people out to this example, and they could get it working. So I think at least that would be a good start. The one that comes to mind, it changed names, so not sure what the current name was, but it was basically a virtual world where participants would move with some kind of avatar that looked like a robot, and the head was like an old TV, and you could see video there, right? They implemented this with libjitsi Meet and Unity, so libjitsi Meet being the low-level API with no UI. And what they did then, which I thought was very clever, is that as participants got close to each other, then they would go into a meeting. So you're just roaming around the world, and when you get close to somebody else, in the background, you're connected on the same meeting, and then they use, audio panning so that it looks, as you get closer, is louder, and it simulates a bit the type of conversation you would have at the bar, right? And
Right.
I really like the idea. I'm not sure, after the pandemic, how things will pan out in the next few years. But one of the things that I think traditional online meeting tools don't represent very well is when a large group goes into a bar or into a restaurant, because there will always be these smaller groups that serendipitously, get created. You have a conversation, then you go to the restroom, come back and join a different group. And it's hard to do that with an online meeting tool. And breakout rooms are not the answer because they're heavily structured.
Mhm.
So it's a lot more, but this one is more similar to that. You're just roaming, so you can actually overhear what's going on. If you like it, you can stay and then participate. So, and they build that with Unity. I thought it was very cool.
Yeah, I like that use case a lot. It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned, the pandemic. We were very fortunate, I think, globally, that WebRTC was ready for the pandemic, and that was, a real benefit to everyone during phases of lockdown. But the metaverse and VR were not really ready for the pandemic, and it would be interesting to kind of speculate how things might have changed, and what things might be sticking around now post-pandemic, hopefully, from had the sort of metaverse concepts been more mature at that time. And I hope we are not. I do think we will see some more metaverse applications in the future. I hope they're not accelerated by another pandemic, certainly. But it's but I do think some of that is coming anyways. And so yeah, I think it's very interesting to see use cases like that. Another question here from Azure84, going back to the 10K participants that you talked about previously, adding support for that. Because Jitsi video bridges are SFUs, don't you need a crazy number of them to support 10,000 participants, even with a viewer mode?
That's a good question. And the answer is no. I think, if I recall correctly, we can do 10,000 with 50 of them. The way we do it is, and there is still room for optimization, is because the thing that sort of limits the scalability of the bridge is the topology of a meeting. And where we think we're going is we're going to have the active participants in a bridge, and then the visitors cascaded. And just receiving is a simpler operation. So there's fewer things that need to happen in that bridge, and we can optimize for 3 topologies where people will be in one bridge connected to another bridge connected to another bridge, and they are receiving all those streams, but we don't need to worry about all the cross sending things that will happen, because there is a few sources and a lot of destinations. So we can handle it, and with this architecture we can always add also more servers, but it's not a ridiculous amount. Let's put it that way. And the thing is, having a 500 active participant meeting, it's a very heavy operation, but with this model, it no longer makes sense to have such a large meeting. You can think of it as you're always going to have, in reality, at most, I don't know, 50 real participants, and the rest, and I'm being very generous with the 50. The rest are going to be just passive listeners. So right now we have worked on the promotion side of the things, where you're a visitor, you get promoted to an active participants. We're working on the demotion side of things, which is, so after you have participated, at one point we're gonna make you a visitor back if you don't need to participate anymore. Because as a visitor, you're going to consume fewer resources. You need less updates on the media path. It's a bit specific to how our implementation works, but let's just say that a visitor does not represent the same load as a normal participant. That's why we are able to scale way better in number of visitors than in numbers of active participants.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Azar, for your question. Guillermo asks about the PSTN dialing component coming up in JaaS and the Jagazi, I believe you said is the name of the plugin for that. Do you want to provide a kind of PSTN termination instead of using Jagazi as a connector? Can you expand a little bit on that?
So not 100% I get the question. So Jagazi is a connector between Jitsi and SIP, and it supports two modes of operation, so dial in and dial out. So right now we support, in components, we support dial in, which means when you go to when you go to your meeting info, you're going to see a list of phone numbers, and you're going to see a conference ID and a PIN. And if you punch those in, you're gonna make it through. But dial out is the opposite. So it's, I want to invite someone, you punch in the phone number and we will make a phone call to them. So that second part is not currently available as a component, but it is something we do support in the full-blown JaaS, let's say. So we do provide PSTN termination as a service. Jagazi itself is a building block. You could, for example, configure your own asterisk or free switch and just make a SIP connection to Jagazi and do the termination wherever you want. But as a service, we're exposing it that way. So Jagazi is and will be a connector, and then the termination will be wherever your trunks take you.
Thank you, Saul. And one more question before we get on to some conversation about AI in Jitsi. Jay Herrero Mail asks, is there any plan to integrate IP multicast in WebRTC? What do you think about that? Is it a good or bad idea?
Honestly, I don't have an opinion on it. I'm not sure if it's useful in our particular use case. So for meetings where we, as I said, within a meeting you have two types of conversations, one-to-one and the many participants conversation. It's not very clear to me how multicasting would help there. I think in some scenarios that we've seen here at ComCon, more like closer to the broadcasting industry, I think there it could certainly help. Like I can see how broadcasting a feed to a multicast group and then reading the feed and injecting it to different services with maybe wrapped into like NDI or something like that. I can see that working. For your usual meetings that happen mostly in a browser or in some endpoint that looks like a browser, and you're connecting every participant to every other participant, I'm not sure that is something that we could have a use for at this point.
All right. Thank you all for your questions. A lot of great questions today. You're welcome to keep those coming, but I'm going to move us on to a very hot topic in everything technology these days, to be sure, but certainly some big impacts in WebRTC tools and application development, something we'll be talking about more at conferences throughout the rest of this year, I think. So tell us a little bit about welcoming the robots to Jitsi.
Yeah, so that's it's the new gold rush, isn't it?
That's right.
So I think everybody in not only in our world, but everywhere across tech, they're either paying attention to this now, or they probably should. It is so every once in a while there is this groundbreaking technology advancement that sort of changes the game. I think that WebRTC was that thing when it completely changed the game, and it made what we currently call like legacy VoIP, let's say. And then after WebRTC, it became real-time communications. And no offense to anyone, but everything that has happened since in the WebRTC space is very evolutionary. But generative AI, I think, is more of a revolutionary thing. It is the first time that the average human, can see something created out of thin air by the robots, right? And so seeing how that can help the products you're developing is being actually quite fun to see and experiment. So we have spent some time in building some prototypes and thinking about our strategy towards this. because there's a number of ways to go about it. So I have here a couple of slides of where we're gravitating towards. So we started out by building, we first thought that the right thing to do would be to build a bots framework where, and in this bots framework, you would create like virtual, well, fake participants that are robots that join a meeting. And as they join the meeting, they can provide functionality. And we built a couple of them to test out, like an assistant that you could ask questions about, and something dedicated to summaries. I think if you're working on the meetings space, the first and obvious place to go to is summaries, because it is something that is very useful and you can see the usefulness real quick. But soon we realized that there might be a way to split this. So some of these features sort of require, let's say, a fake participant or something of the sort, like a bot, because they are conversational, like, for example, an assistant. But some other features can be a bit more, could be built in, like summaries. Could be something that happens post-meeting or in the middle. I'm going to talk about that in a sec. So then we decided to sort of split this into two parts. So we would do core features that we plan on making Jitsi Meet capable of. For example, meeting summaries and action items. And then we're going to finish up the work on the bots framework so that you can run scripts that allow you to basically connect whatever it is that you want into a meeting and appear as a fake participant and interact with the existing people. And that could be, for instance, an assistant or something that I hope it pans out in an interesting way is Google had started some kind of competition, and the result is going to be open source, with where the competition is about coming up with a model for transcribing American Sign Language. And I think a bot that can recognize a participant's sign language and then text-to-speech it would be really helpful for accessibility, for example. So the idea behind the bots framework is to not think about all the use cases that might exist, but provide the tools for when they materialize, because they might not exist yet, we can use them and leverage them. Going back to the gold rush, the joke goes that the ones that made the money were not the gold diggers, but the ones that sold the shovel. So we're trying to create shovels here for people to integrate these things into the confinements of the meeting. Because as of today, there's not really a good way. There's no comprehensive framework of sorts to bring a fake participant into a meeting and then run some code that interact with all of the meeting stuff. And in the next couple of slides, I have sort of described how these two parts are going to look like. This one is very simple, and I think many people will probably be looking at something like this, which is you probably want to have the idea of an AI core that exposes different services to different parts of your organization or even your own product, right? So, for example, of course, you're going to need some transcription capability, because in order to provide an accurate summary or to process with any of the AI models that are based on text, you need the text. But what you have usually is the speech. So right now, and we have had this for a reasonably long time, we have had used the Google engine for it, which supports transcriptions and also translations of these transcriptions. And it has worked decently. The problem is when you try to use it with like LLM models to get some intelligence there, you realize that those transcriptions are not super accurate. And so we have found that Whisper is a lot better at it. So we decided one of the very first things that we are going to bake into this is to run Whisper locally. This is important because I think one of the first things that will transpire from this is that, and it goes in a way similar but not quite, the CPaaS story is it's quick to start with one of the API services out there by OpenAI or whatever. But the fact that you're passing full conversations to a third party raises many red flags privacy-wise to many people. So I think whoever is building these ideas, you need to consider from not day one, but day two, what's your story going to be with running these models locally? Because you probably can't afford to send all that data out of your organization. So Whisper, we're going to run locally. Then you were going to want some text-to-text, some large language model capability, which could be OpenAI or it could be an open source LLM. And here we haven't sort of decided yet. There's a bunch of models that are available to use with varying degrees of latency and features. And I think there probably won't be one answer. And it's going to have to be a combination of them. Because, for example, all of the meeting summary experiments that I've seen are usually post-processing. And so after the meeting, it got transcribed, you get a meeting summary, action items, and well, right there, for example, there are models tweaked for summaries, and maybe that model is not that good at doing action items. So you might want two different models just for that for this piece of information, summary on one end and action items on another end. But what's more is that, and this is something that I built in our prototype, was, well, summaries are cool, but I want them real time, which means if I arrive late at the meeting, I want the summary of what happened up until right now before I joined, so I can catch up and continue. And you might want a faster, but maybe a bit less accurate model, because it's fine, you're in the conversation, you can catch up. But in post-processing, you want the absolute best that you can to have the most accurate result. So that's why I think the AI core that everybody will need to have probably wants to have the ability to run multiples of these. And probably you begin with OpenAI's GPT, and then you might want to switch to an open source LLM like the meeting summaries. I plan on testing Falcon 40, Falcon 7, Llama. There's a bunch of them with varying degrees of GPU RAM requirements. So there is also a cost aspect that needs to be checked, right? But the idea would be that you have those needs, and you probably want to build something to export these needs to different parts of the organization that have these requirements. And last but not least, and I'm sure more boxes will come into here in the future, is text to speech. So after you first took the speech, transforming to text, then you did some text to text sort of analysis and transformations and gotten some output, and then you want that output to go out somewhere, right? And especially if you're building like a bot stuff, you want that thing to speak. And so a text-to-speech service can help. And there, well, you can use some external services like, again, Google, or if played with PlayHT, it's a Y Combinator startup. Their API is very easy, so I tried their free tier. It was very nice, not sponsored or anything. Or you can run locally, Colloquy, for instance. So there's a bunch of tools. And again, just like before, idea would be to be able to shield them in an API that you can use elsewhere, so it's not aware of what you're using, but you're making these decisions for your other products. And then, so once we have the AI core, we would go into in our case, the bots framework. And the way we built it, it was very fun. Hoping we can open source that soon. Is based on running headless Chromium on the backend, because why not? So the thing is, what is the best WebRTC client? It's a browser. It's really a browser. So it's got all the APIs, and because it always begins with yeah, but you can run, this a small C++ library or something on the back end. Yeah, but a browser is almost like an operating system. They've got everything. And for instance, one of the things that we wanted is to give this bot thing some kind of humanoid appearance of sorts. So we created the ability with a Blender model and WebGL. The fake participant has a face. It's a little robot, and it moves its mouth when it starts speaking. And that is something you can do in the browser because it has all of the APIs available, and you can actually run it. So the idea is to you expose a web API, and when a bot is required to join a meeting, you get all the metadata necessary. We use Puppeteer in our case because we're going to run Chrome. In my opinion, is the browser that runs WebRTC the best, and we run it without actually any UI because there's no UI. And the bot script actually is a libjitsi meet. It's attacking the libjitsi meet API, so our lower level API. There's no user interface, but we can connect to the same meeting. We can create a fake stream off of a canvas that's being painted with WebGL, and that's where our sort of moving head is. And we can run user code to do whatever it is that they want. And some of the examples we built were like an assistant kind of type where you could ask questions to this assistant via chat or do hot word detection. So you could say, hey, assistant, blah, 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 while they're talking, and they would answer. And then this thing would connect to this API core thing that they talked about before. In the first incantation of this thing, we had all the AI things part of this bots framework. But then it kind of became a little bit more obvious that it would be better to separate. And also, in our case, it might be anecdotal, but I don't know, I think we made the right choice to, for instance, this thing is written in JavaScript. We're using Puppeteer, which is written in JavaScript primarily, and it bodes well because libjitsi meet is also a JavaScript thing, and it needs to run in this browser context, right? But then the AI, basically the lingua franca of AI is Python. Which it so happens to be my favorite language. So I was very happy to sort of go back to it and write the AI core in it so that the bots framework can just call out the APIs that we offer. And then maybe the things that we've talked about in embedding summaries directly into Jitsi Meet, they can just attack that API directly. The bots framework is for when you need bots. So this is where we're gravitating after some prototyping and some thinking around. In general, everything Jitsi is open source. So this will be once ready. That's what we're shooting for. And this is where our head is right now. But of course, we're listening. We're looking at the industry. We're coming here to learn from other people that have worked in similar problems. It's funny how there's been a bunch of, I've had a lot of AI talk in the hallway and inside the rooms as well. And it's been pretty interesting to exchange notes and say, that's how you're going to do it. Well, I had the same idea. Oh, but that model, I found it's too slow for real time. Like, yeah, what about the non-real time use case? Oh, well, we can work for that. So there's been lots of interesting conversation. So going back to your first sort of question, it has been very useful to come here also to sort of validate some of the ideas that we had while building this.
Excellent. Yeah, I imagine there is a lot of excellent conversation going on in the halls there at ComCon. And Saul, I really appreciate you taking the time away from ComCon to join us for this. So I don't want to keep you too long from the sessions and the surprise event tonight, but we really appreciate you taking the time with us. Thanks to all of you for watching and a lot of great questions. Saul, any closing thoughts that you want to share, or where our viewers can go to learn more about Jitsi or JaaS or to follow you?
I'd say just keep an eye on what we're up to. That can be on Twitter @Jitsi News, on the JaaS website, jaas.8x8.vc, if you want to give it a try. And yeah, I'm hoping this is of use to many of you. Maybe it inspires you to build your own thing, or maybe you want to use Jitsi for your next project.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you, Saul, so much for taking the time, for joining us from ComCon. Yeah, get back to the conference, and look forward to staying in touch with you, hearing more about about the AI bots and AI in Jitsi, and more about what happens in the halls at ComCon. A lot of exciting developments, I'm sure, coming out there. Hopefully, you'll discover some good shovels to build.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Darren.
Thank you. All right. As always, this video will be available on the WebRTC-Ventures YouTube channel, as well as on our own blog at WebRTC.ventures. As for other events, you'll see the WebRTC-Ventures team this year will be at ClueCon in Chicago in August, the Illinois Institute of Tech Real-Time Conference, also in Chicago in early October, TAD Summit in Paris, October 19th through 20th, and at AWS reInvent in Las Vegas at the end of November, early December. So let us know if you'll be there too. We'd love to meet up with you. We'll put links to all of those events in the blog post for today's episode at WebRTC Ventures. And our next episode will be July 12th, 10 a.m. Eastern. Our guest will be Paula Oces Noguero from Numena, where she is an AI engineer. We'll be continuing the conversation about AI and video and WebRTC. Paula just presented at ComCon yesterday, I believe. So we're looking forward to learning more from her at that. To find out more about our upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at WebRTC-Ventures, LinkedIn, Twitch, YouTube. Join our email list at WebRTC-Ventures. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Let's make it live.
Thanks for joining us for WebRTC Live. Visit our website at WebRTC.ventures to learn more about our custom design and development services, and to learn more about upcoming episodes of WebRTC Live.